competition, you're taking on a fictional business identity and assigning a fictional business identity to the three of us. Make sure everyone knows who you are and who they are before you begin. You have 25 minutes with a 5-minute cushion, so I've set the alarm for 30 minutes. And if you finish sooner, that's fine. Then what will happen is we'll stay in the role that you put us in for the next 20 minutes and ask you questions about your proposals. And then after that 20 minutes, we'll have 10 minutes of stepping out of our roles and giving you our opinions about the presentation and so on. So that's the game plan. Any questions? You know all about it.
Okay.
Well,
Oh, do you need a pen?
you may.
I have an extra.
You want to tell us who we are before you start, or are you going to make that part of your presentation?
Okay, this is fine. Got that one. Okay, good afternoon. My name is Megan.
Pepe?
My name is Zoltan. My name is Jay.
And we're from Thunderbird ASU campus. We are from Arizona State University, Thunderbird campus. So my name is Megan, and today I will be presenting the introduction of our topic, Is It Dope to Win? The Case of CrossFit.
Now tell us who we are and who you are. That is the roles that you're playing.
Yeah, I mean, we are consultants. We're consultants for CrossFit, the company CrossFit, and raising the ethical and financial implications of our case of doping in the sport. And we are addressing the board of CrossFit.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
So today we present the transparency issue of doping in CrossFit, as well as its social and financial implications. We will also be providing similar cases to back up our argument and alternative solutions. I would like to give a little historical context before we start. The word athlete, in its Latin origin, also means athlos or athleta. This word has descriptions such as combatant, prize winner, and wrestler. Unfortunately, we can already see that this word is kind of vague and it varies. Similarly, the word fitness, if we look in the Webster's Dictionary today, has descriptions such as strength. This is relevant for modern day athletes because unfortunately they do not have a standard to create or develop better fitness goals. And that can sometimes lead to specific behaviors such as doping to reach their specific goals. In 1967, the International Olympic Committee established the Medical Commission in response to an increased usage of performance-enhancing substances. In 1981, Ben Blucknett was stripped of his title and banned from the Olympics because he was caught cheating. And he was kicked out by the International Amateur Athletic Federation. In 1988, Congress passed the Anti-Drug Abuse Act. This made the possession, distribution, and usage of these kinds of substances criminal. In 1999, the World Anti-Doping Agency was established, aka WADA, and a year later, the United States Anti-Doping Agency was established. Now let's get back to CrossFit. The founder in the 1970s, Greg Glassman, founded an unorthodox physical training method. People called him crazy. He didn't realize that 30 years later, his unorthodox method would explode into success. In 2001, he established CrossFit.com. And for the first time, the word fitness had a standard definition, something that athletes now can go by. It was measurable, observable, and replicable. The mission of the CrossFit Foundation is to improve the health and fitness of its athletes through education, advocacy, philanthropy, and research. CrossFit uses functional movements that resemble that of a gymnast, runner, rower, wrestler, and so much more. Athletes have to be ready to perform any task given to them. Today, CrossFit has over 10,000 affiliates worldwide, and that number has been doubling since 2006, every other year. CrossFit has a 10-year contract with Reebok. This is great for both companies because it revived Reebok's brand and it gave CrossFit a market that was previously untapped. Reebok has introduced CrossFit into its day-to-day operations, into its company's philosophy, even trains its staff in CrossFit, accepts product design, pays competitors now, which was previously undone, and sponsors the CrossFit Games. Every year, the CrossFit Games increases by 166%, which now takes us to the ethics portion of this introduction. The CrossFit Games provides a $2 million purse prize. You can imagine the scenarios and the incentives that athletes might consider as far as cheating. In 2013, an interview with top CrossFit athlete Dan Bailey states that there's definitely room for improvement as far as anti-doping enforcement goes. As the games get bigger, as the purse prize gets bigger, as the sponsorships get bigger, it actually comes down to the individual and his or her peers. Violations of the CrossFit Games rulebook, as well as the usage of specific performance enhancers, is strictly prohibited. But that's it. There's really no enforcement after that. CrossFit states that it follows the UFC's model of an anti-doping program. Interestingly, UFC partners with an independent agency, the US Anti-Doping Agency. CrossFit, on the other hand, tests its competitors internally. UFC tests its participants during game day, during their training, gives unannounced tests, whereas CrossFit only provides urine tests during competition days. UFC also supports a 2-year ban on those caught cheating. A similar attitude from CrossFit does not exist. Thank you, and I will pass the reins off to Jay.
Thank you, Megan. My name is Jay McAuliffe, and I'm going to be talking about doping scandals in other sports. Picture to the left right there is Lance Armstrong. Below him is Ben Johnson, the Canadian sprinter. To the right of that is a news article about Ryan Braun being suspended from baseball. Another news article just above him is Mark McGuire, and that's a picture of Alex Rodriguez on the Yankees. All right, so my first case I was going to talk about is Major League Baseball, and what I want to talk about first is the steroid era. And it was considered a black eye for the league, or was it really? In a sense, from 1995 to 2001, attendance for baseball was actually up 44%, and revenue for the league was up by almost 115%. And one of the reasons for that was during 1998 was the year of Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa. And for any baseball fans would know that that year everyone would tune in Sunday night baseball, Monday night baseball, just to see those guys compete, to see who would hit the most home runs. And during that year, by the end of the year, Mark McGwire hit 70, which was the all-time record, until Barry Bonds broke it 3 years later in 2001 with 73. And Sammy Sosa fell just a little bit short with 66. So people thought, oh, these guys are superhumans, great baseball players. But it turns out that they later on they were accused of performance-enhancing drugs. And the book, Jose Canseco's book, the Alltel book of PEDs called Juiced. And later on in 2010, in front of Congress, they said, no, we did not do steroids, and a few years later, they came out and admitted it. Moving on to Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens, they've been accused multiple times in different books, different story articles, and there's no evidence that they actually did use. Moving on to Ryan Braun and Alex Rodriguez, they were part of the Biogenesis case, which is a company down in Florida, where a former employee leaked information about these two specifically and 89 other players about PED usage. And this really hurt Ryan Braun specifically, because in 2010 he came on as a really good player, and then a year later he won the MVP. Then that same year, ESPN reported that he tested positive for testosterone, and he was suspended 65 games. Alex Rodriguez in 2009 admitted that he used steroids earlier on in his career, but there's like no evidence in the courts that could link him to it. But the Biogenesis case in 2013 did link him to it, and after all the appeals process, he was suspended over a year and a half in 2014. Next, I want to talk about cycling, the Tour de France, and Lance Armstrong. And in my opinion, and a lot of other people's opinions, it's the worst PED scandal in sports. Armstrong built an empire off his success with endorsements, the Live Strong Foundation in 1997, Nike, 24-Hour Fitness, and Anheuser-Busch Beer. Armstrong won the Tour de France from 1999 to 2005, so 7 times in a row, which is incredible, especially because he was coming back from cancer. So if everyone remembers that time, the yellow wristlets to Live Strong, I'm guilty, I wore one of those. After years of denial, he finally admitted PED use on the Oprah Winfrey Show in a 2013 interview. That cost him big time in terms of endorsements. He lost over 75 million endorsements. His reputation was ruined, unfortunately for him. And the big quote from that interview is, "I feel ashamed," which I don't blame him. After Armstrong, the crackdown of doping and cycling, it was pretty big. During that time, it was not only just Armstrong that was cheating, it was pretty much everybody. As it says there, 87% of the top 10 finishers were either accused or actually confirmed dopers. So pretty much everyone who was winning was cheating. So it really was a black eye on the sport of cycling and the Tour de France specifically. And after 2005, the Tour de France, and specifically cycling in general, from 2006 to 2014, there was huge negativity towards the Tour de France. Broadcasters were less likely to cover the event, and sponsors less likely to endorse the cyclists because a lot of them thought they were probably just cheating. Why this matters to CrossFit in our discussion. The short-term effects. The popularity of these athletes and sports themselves were at an all-time high when these athletes were cheating. So it raises the question of whether, like, I'm trying to say this, like, the ethical implication of like these athletes are performing really well and these drugs are helping them, so is it really wrong? But the long-term effects of these scandals for each sport is attendance was down, viewership way down, and the popularity of the sports decreased because the fans just didn't trust the athletes anymore. And the questions I wanted to address were, has doping usage actually hurt the sport, or is it actually the public scandals that puts these athletes in the public eye and humiliates them? And like UFC, they actually do use a third-party drugging agency, but CrossFit does not. Is PED testing flawed in the first place? And I just wanted to quickly go over some financial implications before I hand it off to Zoltan. Performing doping tests entails enormous annual costs to society. And referring to official information from the WADA, which is the World Anti-Doping Agency, in 2013, and this was just the lowest year I found, it ranged between $229 to $500 million how much it costs to actually test athletes. And in addition, the repetitive occurrence of doping has the power to cause the sport to lose its credibility. And like I said before, the best case that I just went over was cycling. This also involves baseball, track and field, the NFL, CrossFit, and UFC. I'm going to hand it over to Zoltan now.
So the question is, how will the potential doping scandal affect the company and the brand CrossFit? And based on Jay's analysis, it looks pretty obvious that long-term financial implications are inevitable. But we also believe that CrossFit is really well protected from the short-term negative financial implications for two main reasons. One is the company or the industry, the functional fitness industry, is very, very unique. CrossFit doesn't really have a big competitor within the industry, and also the relative immaturity of the functional fitness industry in its industry life cycle is another answer why they could be very well protected from the financial implications of at least a short-term implication from a doping scandal. So I would like to talk about the industrial, just using Porter's 5 forces analysis, because that explains why it's such a unique industry and CrossFit is very well protected from financial implications of a potential doping scandal. So first, so one thing actually before I talk about the Porter's 5 forces. So Porter's 5 forces is supposed to be an industry analysis, not a company analysis. But in this case, CrossFit is such a strong, huge player in an industry. Whenever I talk about the functional fitness industry, we always talk about CrossFit and the characteristics of CrossFit. So in terms of new entrants, usually it's very low in the functional fitness industry. Anybody can start a gym, at least on the local level, and the capital investment is very, very low. However, CrossFit or functional fitness industry, and especially CrossFit, has like a very defined ecosystem. So trying to copy the idea of CrossFit and the media presence of CrossFit, it's very, very hard, especially on the global level. So on a local level, yes, it is easy to start a gym and compete successfully with CrossFit. On a global level, it's such a investment-heavy industry that it's very hard for new companies to enter that same kind of playground where CrossFit is competing. And of course, there's a bandwagon effect. People who do CrossFit, it's a very prestigious way of working out. A lot of people want to do that. Very strong media presence of CrossFit. That's another reason why it's hard to copy the business model. Threat of substitutes. I saw it linked to the previous competitive force. Yes, there are substitutes. There are other ways of working out. Team sports, can be played on any level from beginners to professionals. There are traditional gyms that offer something like functional fitness. But if someone wants to do functional fitness and wants to have that experience of belonging to a community, CrossFit and functional fitness doesn't really have many substitutes. And the other uniqueness why CrossFit or functional fitness doesn't really have many substitutes is the CrossFit Open. So the first, I don't know if you're familiar with the CrossFit Open idea, is the first level of competing in the CrossFit game. So pretty much in all CrossFit gyms there are judges, and they're the same workout that every athlete on the world has to perform. So if I signed up for $25 a year for CrossFit Open, I can work out, I can time myself, and my name will be on the list of all the CrossFitters in the world. So I can compare myself to the best athletes in the world, which is impossible in any other sport. So I can't compete. I can't compare myself to an NBA player just because I play basketball. So that's the uniqueness of CrossFit that attracts a lot of people, and there are not so many substitutes of that kind of workout experience. Bargaining power of buyers is also a very interesting aspect of this industry. I would say it's quite low, but in the higher end of the the low competitive force, because there are many buyers. There are many customers. There are no one single customer group that will affect the sport itself. But at the same time, the customers of CrossFit have a very high quality demand and low price sensitivity, meaning that they are willing to pay a much higher amount than anybody else who works out for their workout experience. So the average monthly membership fee of a CrossFit gym is around $150 compared to traditional gyms like $25, $30 membership fee a month. An interesting aspect is that the average salary and average wage of 40% of CrossFitters is over $150,000 a year. So they're a very quality conscious group of customers. The bargaining power of suppliers is also interesting. We would believe it's very low because suppliers, gym equipment, clothing, accessories, there are tons of companies producing the same kind of supplies. But in the same time, getting or trying to hire coaches who can coach all fields of CrossFit, like weightlifting, powerlifting, gymnastics, it's very hard. There's high demand for a limited number of CrossFit coaches. So these four competitive forces can create a very low industry rivalry. So there are other players. It's a very monopolistic competition. So there are, besides CrossFit, functional fitness has boxing, or a few other brands that are or other ways of functional fitness that can compete with the brand, but not really meaningfully. So that's why we believe that without real competition in the same industry, CrossFit can do whatever it wants at this point without the brand being hurt, because people want to do functional fitness, they don't have the opportunity to pick another sport. Another reason why we believe CrossFit or functional fitness is very well protected from short-term financial consequences, because they are in a very, very early stage of the industry life cycle. So at this point, they are still creating a market. They are still creating the demand for the sport itself. And in this pre-entry introductory phase of the industry life cycle, the most important part of the company's management is creating brand awareness. And if it's a doping scandal, a lot of people will be familiar with the sport, people who never heard of CrossFit or functional fitness before. It doesn't mean that those people like myself who go to a CrossFit gym, I would be discouraged to go because somebody at the highest level of the sport, is taking performance-enhancing drugs. At this very early stage, we believe that the company is very well protected from short-term financial consequences. And Pepe is going to talk about the long-term effect of doping.
So, there you go. So as we have seen, as Megan presented some background history in terms of the issue of doping and how CrossFit developed, the cases that Jay presented in terms of how doping has affected these athletes and society as well, and some financial implications, we wanted to raise a question of what does ethic in sports really mean? All these athletes that Jay talked about, from Alex Rodriguez, Mark McGuire, Lance Armstrong, at some point they were kids in their lives. Kids looking up to some heroes, to some super athletes that they wanted to be part of or they want to be alike, and they want to be part of a system, of a culture that developed these guys when they were, since they were young until they got involved into these scandals. So a system of values where you grow up as a kid and you go, regardless of the sport, into a system of integrity, of honor, value, and respect, where you get taught as a young kid to respect your peers, to respect your coaches, to respect your parents, and to value all those things based on integrity and honor. In ethics, actions and consequences, in sports, actions and consequences are very important. Actions within the practice. As a young kid, individuals learn that practice is what builds character, what builds the definition between success and failure, and what teaches them that failure is not a bad thing. It's actually something that helps the individual develop and grow as a whole. As a sport, in terms of ethics, education is a huge part of this. Because regardless, like we said, of the sport, the physical education part is very important for the self to grow and to understand the difference between successes and failures. Why are these values so important? Because as an athlete, it's very important to perform and to achieve certain successes. However, we need to define, what does success really look like? What does success for a kid, for a young adult, or for an adult look like? As a kid, success means winning competitions. You know, as a kid, you don't really understand the difference between winning or losing because all you want to do is win. So it's very important to address, what does success really look like since a young age? The balance between the body, the mind, and the will is essential for these kids to understand that as they grow up, the means are more important than the ends in order to collectively grow as a whole. Respect, as we said, is the most important thing of these values. Being able to respect your peers, the hard work and dedication that they put on a daily basis, the respect they have for their parents teaching them the different values that they need to understand to develop as an athlete. As we said, the definition of athlete was very vague back in the day, in ancient times, but it has developed towards a more complex term of fitness. What does fitness really mean? Like we said, CrossFit addresses all these issues in terms of having an individual that has the ability to not only create speed, power, and endurance, but also mental toughness. So what do we want to teach our kids in the future? Do we want to teach them gamesmanship, where the individual perspective is better than the collectivism through a mean of sportsmanship? Do we want to teach our kids that it doesn't matter how you win as long as you do it? Or do we want to teach our kids that it's not about winning, but about learning and collectively working with others in order to build that mental toughness, that strength, and that endurance? As Immanuel Kant says, the ought implies the can. And it's this is very meaningful to me because as a young athlete, it was always, for me, very important to understand that the reason was the basis for a moral foundation. As you can see, the world of CrossFit, and as my peers mentioned earlier, is quickly expanding, quickly growing all over the world. Therefore, the effect on the younger population, which sports has played a huge role in the last couple centuries, can have a huge social impact in our world today. I'm going to focus on two main regions that have had a huge impact in terms of CrossFit, North America and the European Union. With North America having over 7,000 affiliates to CrossFit and Europe over 3,000. So you can see a huge increase, and as we said, there's been a huge increase in private partnerships and sponsorships, which in the short term is very beneficial to the company. However, in the long term, it can also be very detrimental. The youth population in these two countries, as you can see, 19.5% and 15.6% in North America and Europe respectively, from ages 0 to 14. Even though these kids are not involved in CrossFit yet due to the ages, these are the guys that are looking up to these athletes, the guys that are going to be the future of sports, the future of the involvement on these physical education. Something that I want to bring up is the access to information, how that information had a huge influence on the youth lately, especially in the last 2 decades, with the increase in access to the internet and mobile devices. Per se, in this case, in North America, 85% of these kids from 0 to 14 years old have access to a computer, as 80% in Europe. This creates a connectivity, a global connectivity that we can see is developing within the firm of CrossFit. 96% of these kids, and 94% in Europe, from ages 5 to 15, are very dependent on television. They, it's one of the highest percentages I've ever seen in terms of involvement. And it's very important to address that 18% of the population in these two countries are involved in CrossFit, which is a very circumstantial number, considering that these are the people that these guys are looking up to. 80% and 78% from only 5 to 7 years old. 5 to 7 years old are increasingly getting this access to the internet, and social media has played a huge influence and a huge role in this. So now I'm going to pass on to Megan and look at some of the quick solutions that we can have to address this ethical issue that can have social implications on our human and social capital moving forward.
So one of the alternative solutions that we provide for you today is unannounced drug testing. We have seen over and over again through our research that this is one of the main solutions that experts say are most effective because athletes do not have the time to flush out the drugs out of their system. Another, I think what's really clear in this specific case is that CrossFit really needs an independent agency to prevent conflict of interest. With continued partnership, whether it's government, commercial investments, so different companies, different sponsorships, come greater accountability to invest more and more into an anti-doping program. And finally, we as a group really believe that through education and training and possibly a signed oath of honor, we can create better individual and peer-to-peer accountability within the sport of CrossFit and hopefully create a new standard, not only in CrossFit, but in the sport industry. Thank you.
Yeah, now we'll do 20 minutes as the board.
Okay.
I'm not sure I heard this correctly, so you can correct me. You were saying that CrossFit should engage more in testing.
Yes,
Drug testing.
definitely.
But I thought you also said it should be done independently.
Yes, so CrossFit should have an independent doping agency, such as the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency. What UFC does is although they hire the U.S. Anti-Doping or partner with the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency, I believe it's through the agency that the competitors are tested at their competitions before and after training, during their training, and they also give unannounced tests. And since CrossFit states publicly that they follow this model, they should really follow it. So.
Is this going to cost us money then? Is it a contract that we make with
It is going
the
to cost
testing
money.
agency?
And although the sport is new and it's emerging, right now I don't believe it still has the support and the money to implement the same stringent testing that UFC does. But as the sponsorships are growing and as funding becomes more available, this is the expectation.
Okay, so we might not be able to afford it right now, but we're talking about the future then?
Right, there's still steps that they can do now, such as an oath of honor, peer-to-peer accountability, education. That's probably the most important thing. This affects everyone at every level, education. So there's steps now that can start this new expectation. They don't have to wait for money to implement these rules.
So I understand the comparison with the baseball league and Tour de France, but I guess what I'm not quite seeing is that as strong of a parallel with us CrossFit, because in CrossFit it's very much about the individual person, and I feel as though there's less risk to our brand of CrossFit if someone is doping. That I'm not sure people will conflate the doper with our brand as much as they do with something like the doper in Tour de France or the doper and the baseball league, where it's been so, it's so prolific. So I wonder if you can kind of speak to that a little bit, whether we really need to be concerned as the board.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I can definitely address that question. As you mentioned, it's definitely growing, and maybe the impact short term, as we mentioned, might not be, of a high risk per se. However, the uniqueness of CrossFit is that they're growing differently. It's not a sport that only requires speed or agility or strength. It's a sport that involves all of these together. Considering that, it's very important to understand that in the long term, if we don't address these questions, as of now, as of today, the long-term implications are going to be very detrimental. Why? Because people nowadays, if we don't tell them, certain rules, regulations that they should follow, they're going to be, they're going to create an incentive within themselves to cheat, to perform, especially because of the financial incentives that CrossFit has been creating in terms of a pool of money. So, I hope that answers your question. We truly believe that CrossFit can change the way sports is seen. And I guess the question that we need to ask as a company, as CrossFit, is, do we want to see, ourselves involved in any of these scandals and diminish the reputation of CrossFit? Or do we want to set a different example and lead by example and get rid of these issues early on in the stage in order to develop ethical leadership across the world?
So get in front of it.
Yeah. If I could
Makes sense.
just another information, more technical information. If you think about Tour de France, the only interaction with the athlete who is doping with the brand Tour de France is only during the competition. But if you look at doping, or if you look at CrossFit, the CrossFit Games athletes, they are working out all year, every day at a CrossFit branded gym. So their interaction with the brand is throughout the whole year. So that's why we believe that in this case, the implications are probably even stronger than the implications of doping at Tour de France.
So I definitely see this stance that you're bringing forth in terms of the ethical dilemma. Are we going to be seen as a leader who is proactive in testing correctly so that we're not incentivizing athletes to win with the wrong means to an end? I guess I'm struggling a little bit to see the sense of urgency. I can definitely see the case, but as a board of directors, we have multiple initiatives that are on our table. Can you speak to a little bit about some immediate costs that if we don't act now versus if we do this a year from now or 5 years from now?
Yeah, no, absolutely. The reason why we emphasize a lot on the youth is because, as we've seen, the access to information through technology has increased very rapidly just within the last decade. So these kids having this access to information in the long term can have a huge financial implication on these kids that see these people as their superstars, their heroes, through TV and social media, which is two of the major means that CrossFit has been spreading the word throughout the world. These individuals might get a little not have an incentive to get involved in this industry, which is it's a business more than anything else. And being able to address this issue earlier will incentivize people that are becoming more socially aware through technology and social media, the global connectivity. People nowadays do not have they have a better understanding of what the wrong and the right means due to this access to information. So having this addressed early on, I think will incentivize these younger individuals to go through a sport that collectively entails all these tools, all these values, rather than going through per se baseball or cycling and football, that already has a stigma in terms of like, do these athletes actually perform the way they perform, or are they just all of them cheating?
Do you feel that this has a marketing stance to it as well? So in addition to instilling, frequent drug testing, is it also creating messaging and awareness through marketing campaigns or strategies, maybe targeted to certain consumer bases, to say, hey, by the way, this is not what we stand for. We realize this is something that's common in the industry. Have you thought about that stance as well?
There's many marketing tools that CrossFit has been using, especially to address a few cases of doping they have had, in which they involve many super athletes that they had within the world of CrossFit, on how they want to create some sort of accountability within each other. They want to make sure that people outside understand that there's people within the system that know and understand the values and morals that need to be implemented in this industry. So there's multiple tools that CrossFit has been using to try to address these issues. However, there's a little increase that we've been seeing in terms of like individuals, like Lance Armstrong claiming like, no, I've never used performance enhancing drugs or whatnot. However, slowly more and more are coming out. So I think that's a thing that marketing has been trying to tackle right away. However, until these doping scandals are not like completely mitigated, it can definitely have a long-term effect.
I would say a few words about just the urgency of this kind of marketing campaign, and talk about a recent case like Ricky Gerard, who was third in the CrossFit Games, Australian athlete, his first year. So he was on the podium, he was third, and he was caught doping a few months after the competition. And it's a very interesting case because CrossFit is a division called CrossFit Kids. And this is a professional division of CrossFit. It's a CrossFit athlete program designed for people under 18, for kids under 18. And historical data shows that the high-end athletes, they start as a CrossFit Kids. So this CrossFit Kids division is fueling the elite level of CrossFit. And CrossFit released a video of Ricky Gerard after the 2017 CrossFit Games, before actually the drug testing was published. And that video, this little like short promotional video, was addressing most of the young population, because they were trying to show that this is an average guy. They were showing him as he was working on the construction site. He's an average guy, has a regular job, and he can become a top level athlete just by going to a CrossFit gym, working out regularly. He's not especially talented, but he works out, and CrossFit supports this whole idea. And CrossFit Kids is the strongest in Australia. They have the most followers, most kids in the CrossFit Kids division are in Australia. So we can see how, after using this video, kids watching it, kids are becoming Ricky Gerard fans. And it turns out that he's doping. It has a serious effect on the future generation of high-level CrossFitters. Right. So I think it answers your question of the urgency of making steps.
I'm puzzled about incentives. And with the enlarging of the purse, it seems inevitable that there's going to be a strain put on motivation and a strain put on honesty. And when you look at a lot of the athletes today in colleges, and you look at their coaches and athletic directors, they're the ones that are being judged by whether they win or lose. The sportsmanship thing is apparently not a big factor. I guess what I'm trying to say is there are some very powerful non-ethical or even unethical forces at work in the life of a coach, win or leave, and in the life of the athlete. This purse could change their lives. It's like winning the lottery, but it's not a lottery. And what you're asking us to do is to lean back against those external kinds of human frailties, and but you're also telling us that we're not in a position to lean back with with gusto yet, but we might be someday. If I'm trivializing anything that you're saying, stop me.
No, that's fine. Well, I do agree with you 100% that, like you said, I mean, there's short-term and long-term implications, and the incentive, which is very high, every individual, the self-interest of, getting $2 million can definitely like get you thinking on like, hey, should I do this, should I not?
Yeah.
However, if you compare CrossFit to other sports, the issue with other sports, personally as an athlete, I was an athlete my whole life, I never grew up with an idea of like what was wrong in terms of like, I mean, I knew the cheating within the field, I knew the rules, and I knew the morals and values. However, I never had a coach, or I never had someone to tell me that these performance-enhancing drugs not only could have a detriment on my reputation, but also on my health and in the long term, like my mental and physical ability to perform. So when you don't address these things, there's obviously an incentive growing up when you start getting more into the financial side of the game and try to gain that financial ability in terms of like the sport. So I do agree that with you that yeah, there's the incentive part, and these forces, external forces, are very powerful. However, if we tackle them earlier in the stage, it's easier for us to have a smaller effect in terms of like those people that would rather have the financial incentive rather than the moral incentive of sportsmanship, and knowing within themselves that if you win by cheating, that's not winning.
And our role is to be fiduciary custodians of the future of this organization. So, in a way, the moral case you're making about doping and education is one dimension of the ethics of your case. Another dimension of the ethics of your case is us. I mean, you're inviting us to think for the organization as a fiduciary about the future of this organization in a way that boards of directors are supposed to do. That's why you pay us the big bucks. It's like, and you're calling us to a higher standard, it sounds like, and we got to be careful about what incentives there are for boards of directors not to look
beyond
into the future, and there probably are some. I'm not an expert on that, but there's always fires you're putting out urgently now, and the urgent drives out the important.
Well, I guess leading on what Ken said, looking at the business case, I'm hearing that there's great moral ground to doing this and kind of purging these drugs from CrossFit, but I'm not hearing what it's going to cost, and whether the drug. We've looked at the cost of the drug testing. Have we looked at the cost of implementing a CrossFit-wide education or oath of honor? And then what are the risks there? I mean, one of the risks, of course, is, you start doing this and you find a bunch of people are using the drugs, and now, what do we do with that information? That gets out. And now our reputation is even more damaged. So could you speak a little bit to those two things?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I did want to add one thing as far as a financial implication. In CrossFit's own mission, and it's CrossFit's foundation mission, they emphasize education along with advocacy, research, and philanthropy. So on the philanthropy side of things, their 10-year contract with Reebok is huge. This is not just a game changer for CrossFit, but it's a game changer for Reebok. it revived the Reebok brand. So I would be confident to assume that if some scandal broke out, this wouldn't necessarily be great for Reebok. But maybe one of my peers can go deeper into.
In terms of the cost of doping per competition, especially big Olympic competitions, it's a high cost, from 150 to 250 million dollars, depending on the amount of athletes involved. Which is why we mentioned earlier that the fact that CrossFit is a young company, young industry, they don't have the capital to implement this across the whole world. However, one solution that I could see in terms of how they can reduce this cost, as Megan mentioned, what they focus on research, education, it would be a good way to maybe partner with local entities, with per se universities, do some research on the performances, with local doping agencies that might have a lower cost for them to partner with this. And also we could create an incentive for these doping agencies to create some sort of research, once again, to develop better and new technologies to address these issues.
Just following up with what Megan was talking about, is not only CrossFit is incentivized to do drug testing to try to avoid the negative consequences, but also Reebok. Reebok, and it's interesting that CrossFit usually doesn't pay this $2 million price from its own budget from the year to the daily operations, but it's paying from the sponsorship of the CrossFit Games. So Rogue Fitness, Reebok, RX Fitness, they are all sponsoring the CrossFit Games. So as she said, it will doping scandal. It would not only hurt Reebok, not only with CrossFit, but all the sponsors. So I think part of the cost could be very easily shifted to Reebok, to Rogue Fitness, who are incentivized to engage in some kind of drug testing to make sure that their reputation will not be destroyed by a potential doping scandal.
Okay.
We have time for one more question.
I'm good, actually.
I'm good. Do you have
You're
another?
good?
Yeah, I'm good.
No?
Well, I don't have one, so we've got 13 seconds to spare. So we'll call that the end of our role play.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And now we'll go into the just reactions to your presentation and the persuasiveness of it, and where it might be improved, where it couldn't possibly be improved, and so on.
And this is in hope of helping them for tomorrow, right?
Yes,
Okay.
I mean, tomorrow you're gonna be, that 10-minute one is all about the ethics involved here. And that's why I was trying to make that point about our ethics. And that's another piece of this that I think you didn't have it originally in there, but there's no reason you can't put it in there if you think it's valuable. If you think it's Ken Goodpaster's hobby horse, you can forget it. Yeah, we're trying to help you advance in the competition. I mean, we rely on sponsors too. Anyway, my overall reaction is that this is a very innovative topic. I mean, it took me a while to get my head around what CrossFit really is. And I think you could do a little better at clarifying the nature of the animal that we're talking about on the front end, so that people who aren't familiar with this I mean, old people like me, would get it quicker. Eventually, I think I did get it, but it took me too long. Your slides were good, maybe a little too wordy. One of my colleagues, Jim Arnold, says you've got to cut down the number of words on these PowerPoint slides, or you're going to put your audience to sleep or something. I'm not an expert on PowerPoints, but I think economy is a good idea. I was deeply struck by the point you had to make about you're it's more than educators. You're forming character. It's moral education, not just athletic education. And I think that idea could be made into an important competitive advantage for you, and also part of a strategy to eventually get to this ability. And the local point you just made in response, keep the costs down, but don't say, 5 years from now we'll be able to afford this testing. See what you can do tomorrow. And anyway, those are just a few observations, ladies.
So great job. Enjoyed it. I think it was a really interesting topic, and I've seen scandals like this come out even just recently at different companies, so I think it's definitely top of mind in the health and wellness industry. Overall, just a couple ways to maybe help frame it a little bit easier for me to grasp. In the beginning, my notes were, I think there was probably a little bit, in my opinion, too much time state, like on the historical foundation in the beginning, although I think you presented it well. I just wanted to hear what we're here to listen to. So if you just come out the gate and say, we're here to talk to you about the frequency and the viability of the way that we test our athletes, because we feel like it's going to impact moral character and set the next generation up for the wrong direction. I think if you came out of the gate and said that, I would have been like, oh, okay, that's why we're here. Mm-hmm. And then getting into like the history and the foundation, I think would have been helpful. So just a little bit of like helping to frame the kind of like the punchline in advance, and then kind of filling the dots. I felt like all of you brought out your various personalities, which I thought was great. So all of you present in your own style and personality, and the pacing was great. Slides, I agree, had great information. Probably some slides had a little bit too much words because I found myself reading versus listening sometimes. Mm-hmm. And then also just like the energy, there's probably some times where, when we're going over benchmarks or other cases, I thought it was interesting, but I was like, okay, I get it. Like 2 or 3 cases into it, I got it. And then I wanted to get back to, so ethically, why are we here to, talk about this? And so you got to remember your audience that you chose, the board of directors, is a difficult audience. They've got the attention span of a fly. You got to like get to them, And so the audience that you also chose is a tough one. But overall, I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with everything that my co-judges, my co-directors are saying, or co-judges. So yeah, I definitely wrote down, you set the problem up right at the beginning anytime you're doing a presentation. And in this case, it probably would have been good, because you're consultants, to say, this is your problem, this is our proposed solution, let me explain to you why and what the costs are. Because that's really, at the end, all the board cares about. But I know you have to talk about the ethical issues too, because it's a case competition. But I also was a little lost, like, what are we talking about? What are you trying to get us to do? So that was one thing, definitely, just moving forward when you're doing presentations, keeping that in mind. I also felt like, it wasn't always clear that you were treating us like the board of directors.
Oh, yeah, that was what I was gonna say.
Yeah, so there were times you were talking about CrossFit in the third person, but if you were actually presenting to a board of directors, which you may all have the opportunity to do in the near future, you have to understand that the people sitting across from you represent the company. So it's your company. You say things like that, right? So that it becomes, they do represent the company, and there's that sense of ownership. So that was one thing. I think you guys were all great presenters though, and I love that you don't have notes, and you weren't, that was wonderful, but just keeping in mind your audience. I think,
Can I jump in real quick?
Yeah, please, of course.
So just on that one point, because I forgot to say this, when you're going over the Porter model, I think it was very well presented and very, very thoroughly researched. But as a board of directors, you think we ought to know that. And so I was thinking,
which model, I'm sorry?
The Porter model, like the industry analysis part of it.
Oh yeah, that wasn't necessary so much for me. Yeah.
I was just saying, if you want to shorten it, or just because the audience, you would want to presume that they know that, like presume that they know where they sit in the market,
right.
Presume that they know that it's more of an individualistic model, all those kinds of things. That they would already know all of that information. They know who their competitors are. They should probably know basic profit margins comparatively and things like that. So you don't have to go through all that historical foundation, because then it sounds like you're talking to a third party.
Right, so it's same exact concept. So you spent a lot of time on the competitive space, but I think what you were basically trying to say is we can take something that to you, the board, might feel like a risk, but because we're in such a strong competitive space and we don't have any, and you can just leave that slide up there, because you're going to give the board, if this was a true board thing, you would have given the board those slides. So you could say, as this slide shows, we are, there's no one else in this space who can compete with us, so that's why we can take the risks. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes, it's similar to what she's saying. So that was really, those were my big things. On the actual ethics part of it, I think I like that you brought up incentives. I think incentives is a huge part of ethics that people don't think about enough, so A+ on that. And then also the whole concept of the athletes as role models and how important that is. I would have probably said, because you, CrossFit, are putting your name behind these athletes, you are also role models for the future generations, blah, blah, blah. So, again, just personalizing it, but I really thought that was a really good point. We don't talk enough about the ethics of being a role model. Yeah. Anything else, Ken?
Not that I can think of right now, and we have a whole minute left.
Ooh, a minute.
How did that feel for all
Do
of you?
you have questions?
Yeah, do you have questions of us?
No, I guess just in terms of, I'm one in terms